There we go. It took a little bit. I'm sorry it took so long to get started. We're not Zoom experts yet. I think a few more years of this and we might figure it out. In any case, what we're talking about today is the wonderful expeditions and discoveries at Sutton Hoo in Suffolk, England. Those of you who get Netflix may have seen the recent movie, The Dig, and it was an excellent movie. It actually gave an idea of what a real archaeology dig, unlike Indiana Jones or Lara Croft, or, there was not a single gunfight, nobody blew anything up. They actually just dug and found things. So in that sense, it was an excellent movie. The one problem with the movie, in my opinion, was it didn't actually it showed the ship being discovered, but it didn't show the treasures found. And it didn't mention anything else about the rest of the site. So we're going to talk about what was found at the site besides just the ship. Nancy, ignore that. And the next slide. Okay, the location of Sutton Hoo, as you can see, is right here. It's near Suffolk, England. It's northeast of London, which is down here. And you can see there's Cambridge and Norwich. Over here, we've got Amsterdam and Hague. So it's right on a little river called the Bend. Calling it a river is being generous. It's more of a tidal estuary, but it was how the Anglo-Saxons got these ships into this area. So there is a thing. Next slide. Okay, this is an actual picture taken from 1939. This is one of the only pictures of the actual dig. This was taken from a movie that was made by H.J. Phillips. He was a cousin of one of the diggers, and he came and made a short movie of this. And this movie was lost in the year 2000 and found in Canada. This shows Basil Brown working in the front. The real one, and behind him is Lieutenant Commander J.K.D. Hutchinson, who was also depicted in the movie. All the other official pictures you see of Sutton Hoo was taken by the British Museum, showing the British Museum people digging, some of whom who actually had nothing to do with the dig, and they're all very staged. This is probably one of the only pictures that, and this is a screen capture from the little movie of the real dig as it was happening. I tell you, for a couple of people who'd be interested in the, who saw the movie, there was a good result. When they ended the movie, Lieutenant Commander Hutchinson was going off to the RAF for World War II. I can tell you, fortunately, he did survive the war. And after the war, he went and got his degree in archaeology and came back, and he's the one who dug up all the other things we're going to see at Sutton Hoo. And he did hire Mr. Brown to help him for some of this. So there is a very nice ending to this that was not shown in the movie. Next. Basically, what we're talking about is the Kingdom of East Angles. Kingdom of East Angles is found right down here in England. And this was as an Anglo-Saxon, this is the Anglo part of the Anglo-Saxon. Now, the Kingdom of East Angles, we know, was founded somewhere around 575. We don't know the beginning. We do know it was overrun and incorporated by another kingdom in 918. That's a good 300-year run, which is pretty good for any kingdom. The Sutton Hoo Cemetery was reserved for people of exceptional wealth or prestige. It was used from 575 AD to 625 AD. There are about 20 boroughs, some of which have been destroyed. Now, this is a map of the boroughs, and you notice it only goes up to 18. 19 and 20 are off the map and have only recently been discovered. they decided to go and build a new visitor center / museum. And as they were digging for foundations, they found a couple more burrows, which stopped all the digging. And they're now checking all the way around the cemetery to see if maybe it's bigger than they thought, which it obviously is somewhat. Sorry. Oh, that one. Okay, thank you. Martin Carver believes the cremational burials at Sutton Hoo are the earliest burials. Under Mound 3, the ashes of a man with a horse were found, placed on a wooden trough. Along with the ashes of these two, a Frankish throwing axe, just like this one, was found, which is not something you're expecting since this is supposed to be a Saxon burial. The question is now, does he just likes Frankish throwing axes, adopted it, traded for it, or was he a Frank who of high enough ranking that he got himself buried here? Since the body was cremated, not going to get any DNA, so this answer will probably never be solved. With him was a bronze ewer and a carved bone plaque depicting Nike of winning victory. Both of these are Eastern Mediterranean artifacts. Now, when we first start talking about the Saxons and the Anglo-Saxons, up until the discovery of Sutton Hoo, everything we have in written history implies that the Anglo-Saxons were a bunch of barbarians, primitive, cut off from the rest of the world, and very, the trouble with this is all this information comes from the Normans, who are the ones that conquered them. And of course, the conquerors never say the people they conquered are worth anything. The Sutton Hoo burials go forward and show us that the Saxons, the Anglos, were actually very sophisticated people. And this burial, the one number 3 mound, showed us that not only was this man sophisticated, but there was trade going on between the rest of Europe and the Anglos. Thank you. Now we see Mound 4 here. Mound 4 was interesting. Now, the one thing is with these mounds, we found a lot of stuff that was found, but we think a lot of these mounds were looted, and I'm going to go into the looting later. Under Mound 4, they did find the cremated remains of a man, a woman, a horse, a dog, and bone gaming pieces. We're going to see bone gaming pieces in almost all these mounds. The people very much love their gaming. And here's an example of some of them gaming pieces found in Mound 7. As you can see, they have been burned somewhat. We don't have any board games. We've got lots of gaming pieces. We don't know for sure what games were being played. Now, this looks like they could be pieces for checkers or something of that sort. We also find other pieces that look like they could be chess pieces. But for some reason, we find lots of gaming pieces. We just don't find any board games to go with the gaming pieces. So we're not 100% sure of what's being shown. Okay. Mound 5, which you see in the distance here, had quite a few things in it. It had gaming pieces, small iron shears, a cup, and what's most interesting is an ivory box. Now, the box is in a local museum, and the trouble is the museum won't let anybody test it. So we don't know if the ivory came from the north, like walrus ivory, or it came from Africa. But as far as I'm aware, there was no ivory production in England, so this ivory box is another thing that had to be incorporated. Mound 6 was not that exciting. No sign of a body was found, but there were gaming pieces, a sword belt, and a comb. Now, Mound 14 is a very interesting mound. Um, Mound 14 was a very interesting mound because it was a high quality ladies' goods. And there was only one body in the mound. So this was a lady, high enough stature, she got her own mount, which says something about Anglo culture, the fact that a lady would be considered high enough of stature and or wealth that she got her very own burial mound. With her was a chatelaine, which is a fancy medieval form of a mixture of a lady's keychain / coin purse, a kidney-shaped purse, a bowl, several buckets, a silver dress fastening, and casket hinges. And all these things are made of silver, so she took a few things with her to the grave. Next one. Mound 17 is one I managed to get a picture of some of our Nancy. It was very impressive. This is, we've just moved now from cremations to burials, which means we've moved probably from pagan burials to Christian burials. And this was what's interesting about this cemetery is the nature of the burials change over time. Usually your cemetery is either all pagan or all Christian. This one is mixed. In Mound 17, you had a young man buried with his horse. The sword there is not obvious, but the steel is Damascus steel, which any of you have ever watched the TV show called Forge. They're always making weapons on that. Damascus steel is one of the tougher ways to make a blade. So the gentleman who made this blade for this warrior was a master smith. This is as good a quality blade as you're going to get. His sword had inlaid bronze and garnet buckle. Down here are there's the bronze buckle and the inlays, and we had two little pyramidal garnet straps. And his head was a fire steel, which is basically a thing for starting fires. There's a leather pouch with garnets and a piece of Roman milliflora glass, which had to be imported from Italy. Around the body were two spears, a shield, a small cauldron, which you can see here in the picture, a bronze bowl, which is right next to the cauldron, and an iron-bound bucket. So we had, he took a whole lot with him. Next. Mound 2 is the other of the really spectacular mounds. This was one other ship burial, and as you can see how large it is, this mound has been partially restored to its original height. So that's why it's higher than some of the other mounds, but Mound 2 is a later mound. Now in it was found a ship, but it was put upside down over the burial, unlike burial Mound 1, where the burial was put in the ship. So it was sort of put on top of the burial as sort of a cover. The ship it was put on was 16 feet long by 6 feet wide. And it included a German blue glass cup with trail decoration, a very up glass thing. I've only seen a few times in a couple museums, very fancy. Two gilt bronze discs with animal interlaced ornaments, a bronze brooch, a silver buckle, a gold-coated buckle stud, part of a Damascus steel sword again, another very good sword, and most importantly, a silver gilt drinking horn struck from the same dies as those found in Mound 1. So obviously the person buried here was a contemporary or very close relative of the most important person who was buried in Mound 1. And there are some other graves we're going to talk about next. There were 3 graves found in between Mounds 18 and 5. And these did not have mounds. These are considered some of the last of the burials. So they were used as regular burials, but no mounds were put over them. One contained a child with a buckle, and what's very, I don't know if you want to say touching, sad, whatever, but he had a miniature spear buried with him. I don't know if it was a toy or just an offering for him to be a warrior in the afterlife, but I find that a very touching thing. There's a man with 2 belt buckles and a knife. And the last one was interesting, was a lady with a leather bag, another chatelaine, and obviously an upclass lady. These burials were around 625 AD and are considered the last burials done at the site. Next. Now, there were later burials, but they had nothing to do with the original graveyard. There were burials done in the 8th and 9th century. By this time, the site was considered a pagan site. The fact that some of the burials were Christian and some of them were pagan was forgotten. And the locals in the 8th, 9th century just thought this was strictly a pagan burial site because it didn't have any of the standard Christian symbology on it. There weren't any stone crosses or anything, and they just associated burial mounds with pagans. So they made the partially incorrect idea that this was a pagan cemetery and therefore unholy ground. It was considered a place to be avoided, but it was a great place to throw your criminals, of people who were considered unworthy of proper Christian burial. It is thought from what was discovered that Mound 5 had a gallows put on top of it. A large number of graves were arranged around the mound. What you're seeing here is one of them. The soil conditions, these were very shallow graves, and the soil conditions, the sand had a peculiar behavior. The bodies did disintegrate, but they left impressions of the bodies as they went, sort of like in Pompeii with the plaster cast. And what you're seeing here is one of the poor criminals. He's still got the scaffolding he was hung with next to him. The rope is still around his neck. And you can see he was literally just thrown in the grave with actually no respect whatsoever. It's interesting to see the use and change, because the people who were buried here before were buried with great respect. These people were buried about as badly as can be done. Anyways, we're going to move on to Mound 1, which is what everybody's been waiting for. Again, this is our friend Beasley Brown with J.K.D. Hutchinson. And we will move on. This is an idea of what we think the burial was like when it was originally done. This is what was discovered in 1939. Almost none of the original timber of the ship was found, but the ship's forms were perfectly preserved and all the rivets were in place. The ship was 89 feet long by 14 feet wide at its center, with tall rising stem and stern, the classic Viking style ship you always think of. The planks were attached with iron rivets. There were 26 wooden ribs and oar rest for 40 oarsmen. Now remember the 40 oarsmen, that's going to come up later. The decking and benches were removed to ready the ship for burial, and a central chamber of timber was added, which you can see here in this picture, that was added after the fact during the burial. Then this whole thing was buried in a large mound. Next question is, who was buried here? Since the 1940s, it has been ventured that the grave was of King Redwald. Some think it might have been his son, Sigbert, but most scholars have agreed with King Redwald, partially because his death coincides very well with the coinage and other things found in the grave. And Sigbert died about the same time, but he did not have anywhere near the status of his father, and probably would not have gotten anywhere near as nice a grave as the king. So the consensus is King Redwald was buried here. Redwald's an interesting Old English word that means power and counsel. He was born between 560 and 580 AD. We don't know for sure. Became king around 590 AD. Converted to Christianity in 604 AD, though his queen, whose name we do not know, stayed pagan. As a result, he built a family temple in his palace that had a altar to Christ on one side and an altar to Odin on the other. Some people question just how Christian Redwald really was, but we won't get into that. He died about 624 AD, which fits in perfectly with what was found in the grave. The fact that the grave was found intact is a minor miracle. Between 1536 and 1541, Henry VIII was in need of money. He ordered all the monasteries in England dissolved, stripped them of everything of value. Then he did an organized pillaging of all the royal ancient graves across England. Sutton Hoo was one of those places pillaged. We think that in the other graves, why we found very little in the way of valuable goods, wasn't that they weren't buried there, but that Henry's men got them. Well, what happened to Mound 1? Well, the fortunate thing is the farmers farming the area over the centuries had plowed off one end of Mound 1 and flattened it. So when Henry's men came, they dug down through the center where they thought the center was, but they were actually off center from where the ship was originally buried, and they missed the center chamber, which was a blessing to us in the future, and too bad for Henry. I'm not overly upset for him. Next. So what was found in the graves? Well, no body was found. A soil analysis in 1967 found phosphate and other chemicals indicate there had been a body there, but the soil here is very acidic, so very little in the way of bodies was found. Next. Now we do know there was a 9-foot tall wood platform and 9 foot long, wood platform. The platform, by the platform was an iron bound bucket and an iron lamp with containing beeswax and a bottle made in Germany. Not sure what was in it. To the right of the head was a set of 10 inverted silver bowls, which are absolutely, you can see a picture of them here. And next slide. These are another picture of these were all made in the Byzantine Empire. So these came from Eastern Mediterranean all the way to England here. You can see what beautiful bowls they were. Underneath the bowls were 2 silver spoons. They have Greek lettering on them. One has the name Paul on it and the other the name Saul. Suspicions are these were baptismal gifts to the king when he converted. These also were obviously from somewhere where people were speaking Greek, so probably Byzantine Empire also. To the right side of the body lay a set of spears and also a wand. The top of the wand was a small gold wolf, which you see here, which is gold with inlaid garnets. Very ornate little thing. We don't know what the wand was. Now, some people want to think Harry Potter. Wands were also used as a sign of royalty. They have rods and staffs, and this could have been a royal signal, not necessarily a magical thing. We just tend to think that when we say the word wand. Next. Also found in the grave was a sword. This is a gold with a gold and garnet pommel. The sword itself was fine Damascus steel again, and here you can see the steel is pretty well rotted because of the acid soil, but you can see the beautiful pommel. It's all inlaid garnets and beautiful gold. This is a masterpiece of inlay. Obviously, somebody with great skills. The upper body had a sword harness with a golden garnet fitting with a purse and the great buckle. This is the great buckle. The great gold buckle is made in 3 parts. The covering plate is long ovoid with densely interwoven ribbon animals. So you'd have to look very closely, but each of the ribbons ends in an animal head. The plate is hollow and has a hinged back forming a secret chamber. Nothing was found in the chambers. We don't know what Redwald was hiding in his belt buckle, but it's interesting he had such a chamber. The tongue and hoop of the buckle are solid gold and heavily ornamented. This is considered one of the masterpieces found and probably one of the greatest pieces of gold found from the Anglo-Saxon period. Next. With the body was a pair of matching shoulder clasps, each consisting of 2 matching curved halves with a long removable chain pin that would slide through to put the halves together. They contain extensive garnet work of interlocking wild boars and step garnets with mini floras. I don't know if you can see the mini floras are these little, yeah, right there. Those are imported from Italy. So you've got little Italian imports here. The whole purpose of this was, you can see the lugs on the back. On the one here, there's the lugs. This were attachment for a stiff leather caillou rest, which is a form of breastplate, Roman style. The breastplate did not survive the burial, and there's no other known Anglo-Saxon caillouresses. This would have been a very impressive, and you consider how beautiful the buckles that were used to put the pieces together. I'm sure the leather was beautifully worked too. It would have been an impressive piece of armor. And when you see the helmet that goes with it, when this king was on the field, he would have stood out like a sore thumb, which I think was the whole idea, to impress everybody with his power and richness. You can see how beautifully inlaid these again. And as far as we can tell, these were all made locally. Now there's, I say, a few pieces that were imported from Italy, but it's still beautiful work of Anglo-Saxon. Attached to the belt was a purse. Now the leather in the purse is gone, but we've still got the covering, which was kidney shape work frame on a horn. You can see the horn underneath, which is mounted gold and garnet work depicting birds, wolves devouring men, geometric motifs, and a double panel showing animals with interlaced extremities. These images are also found in the helmet and on the shoulder mount. So we're seeing consistently images. And these were probably all done by the same artisans. In the purse were 40 coins and 2 small gold ingots. Each of the coins were from a Frankish mint, and each one from a different Frankish mint. So somebody went out of the way to get 40 different Frankish gold coins. It has been suggested that these were to pay 4 mysterious ghosts or rowers that get this ship into the afterlife, because it's very interesting that there's 40 coins and 40 oarlocks. Now, this is strictly speculation, but I find it a very interesting idea, because we quite often have people paying the ferrymen to get across the river Styx. Well, why not 40 ghost oarmen to get you to where you're trying to go? I don't have a problem with that. Next. Now, below the body was a large mixture of odds and ends along the legs. Next. One of the things interesting was a wooden lyre. Now, this is a reproduction. The original, the wood was pretty well shot, but there was enough of it left that we could get an idea of how it was shaped and made. I don't know if we're saying that King Redwald played it. He could have been more talented than we thought, not just a warrior, but also a musician. At the very least, he liked music and brought something along, which I find fascinating. Next. Of course, being a warrior, he also liked his drinking. There were 2 ornate drinking horns. These are made from aurochs horns. Aurochs is an extinct form of wild cattle that our modern cattle descended from. From the size of these horns, you're doing some serious drinking if you're filling those up. And the interesting thing is, this is an exact match to the one drinking horn that was found in Mound 2, which I mentioned earlier, and were obviously made by the exact same maker. So we're seeing connections between the mounds. Also, a large quantity of materials were found in heaps on the east end of the wood platform. These include a coat of ring mail, 2 hanging bowls, leather shoes, a cushion stuffed with feathers, folded leather objects that nobody can figure out what they are, but if you try to unfold them, they're going to fall apart, a wood platter, some antler combs, small metal knives, and bone gaming pieces. Got to have our gaming pieces. Whatever we got to say about the Anglos, they love their gaming. I don't think a single grave was found without a gaming piece or 2 in it. On top of the heap was found a beautiful silver dish. This was made in Italy, has controlled stamps from Emperor Anastasios. We know Emperor Anastasios reigned between 491 and 518. So we know this was already at least 100 years old at the time of burial, but somehow it got all the way from Italy to England. So again, we're seeing signs of trading. And it's a very, to me, it's a beautiful piece of Roman silver work. Next. In the northeast stood a shield. Now the wood's gone, but the center boss is mounted with garnets, which are much like the other pieces we've seen. And we've got die-pressed plaques with interlacing animals, as we've seen in the other pieces on the boss. Then either side of the boss, there's a bird and a flying dragon. Also on the top and bottom are animal-orientated strips of metal. These all images are very similar to the ones found on the purse. Many other small objects found in the tomb. I'm not going to go into all of them. We'd be here all night. But I'm going to talk about the most famous object found in the tomb, and that's the king's helmet. The helmet had an iron core with bronze, tin, gold, and silver and garnets inlaid to make it look amazing. And yes, it was a functional piece of armor. It would have been quite functional. It would have been sad to use it in battle because the decoration would have been banged up, but it would have definitely protected its wearer. Trouble is the iron base rusted in the ground, and when the burial chamber collapsed, the whole helmet was smashed into a whole bunch of pieces. So what we're seeing here is the people in the British Museum taking the pieces and trying to fit them back together. There's been 2 different attempts. If you went the 1950s to look at this helmet, you would have seen one interpretation. It was redone in the 1990s, and if you go and look at it now, the reinterpretation is this. This is what we're seeing now as the interpretation. Now, what they've done is put an iron helmet underneath it, as we think there was originally, and put all the decorative pieces on top. Now, what's truly amazing is when you first see it, you see the face with the nose and the mustache and the eyebrows. But if you look closely, the nose, mustache, eyebrows, and a little bit above it are actually a flying dragon. And then the piece coming down from the crest is a flying bird coming up to meet your flying dragon. So you got a lot of interesting imagery there. And then all around it are tin panels. This is the way they think the helmet actually looked. These tin panels have all sorts of imagery carved into them. Some of them are myths we're aware of, some Greek and Roman myths. There's a myth that on there that looks very suspiciously like Beowulf. And then there's some obvious heroic panels on there we have no clue, are probably going to stories that have been lost to history. This is a modern idea of what the helmet looked like at its peak. Again, you can see the dragon that incorporates the face and the bird coming down from the top, and then all these beautiful panels. Yet the side cheeks and the helmet itself would have been quite protective. No other figural plaques like these were known in England till 2009 with the discovery of the Stratford hoard, where they found panels that matched these. So this is obviously super rare. We've only got 2 examples of figural panels like these done in tin from England, and they've never been seen anywhere else. The helmet is comparable to helmets found in eastern Sweden, though the deep cheek places only have parallels to the Cobbergate helmet found in York, England. Outwardly, it's very much like the Swedish examples, but the Sutton Hoo helmet is a much better, higher craftsmanship than any of the Swedish helmets. None of my Swedish fans are mad at me for saying that, but this is the truth. Overall, this burial goes to show us that in the 6th and 7th century, the Anglo-Saxons had vast international trades as well as their own master artisans, and were not quite the primitive barbarians that our Norman friends make them out to in their writings. They had sophisticated culture, music, gaming, obviously brilliant artisans and metal makers, and they treated some upper class women as royalty, just like they had the men. So it was an interesting culture, and so you can't believe everything you read, especially when you're reading it from the conqueror's viewpoint. We're going to stop here, and then we're going to open it up for questions in just a minute. Stop the...
I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, no, we got one more slide though.
Oh, and Nancy said we have one more slide. Want to acknowledge Loretta for doing your attendance of purposes, Dr. Liu for her website design, Friends of Archaeology for program promotion, and Nancy for all the wonderful photos and the editing. And she also helped me with pronunciation of some of these wonderful Anglo-Saxon words and names. And I got to thank her very much for that. So we're opening this up in a minute for questions. Just a second.